I was never meant to be a bride. Not like this. Not to him. I used to dream of love, of warmth, of someone looking at me like I was their whole world. But that dream died the moment my mate ditched me at the altar on our wedding day. He left me shattered, and before the pieces of me could even fall to the ground, they married me off, to the one they all feared, Prince Jaxon Voss, the cursed, cold-hearted Prince of Eldoria. They say he's broken, cruel, untouchable, and now, he's mine. Besties. Stories connect us in amazing ways, but just how far are we reaching today? Kindly comment your location below. Why? The question poured out my lips as I stared at him. I've known Tristan all my life. His black pupils and dark wavy hair to complement them stared at me under the bright sunlight. I just can't be with you, Tristan said as he pulled his hands away from me. We were both standing in front of a priest with the statue of the goddess behind him. It felt like a violation as I stood in my white silk wedding dress. I had no mother and no father. Tristan had been everything they would have as he stepped away. Why can't you be with me? I asked as the priest stepped away to let us resolve our differences. Tristan shook his head. I have fallen out of love with you, and have been thinking of the perfect moment to let you know. And you thought this would be the perfect day? The day we both decided we would tie the knot, I replied. The tears brimmed under my eyes, ready to pour out with the straw that would break the camel's back. I thought it would come back with each moment we spent together. But it did not, Tristan answered. No remorse in his eyes as he stood in front of me. The perfection I had thought him to be faded. Get out. The words spat out of my mouth like venom. Unwanted by my body, but I knew who deserved it the most. Tristan turned away. The heels of his shoes clicked against the marble tiles of the temple, fading as he got farther away. I dropped to the floor. The tears came out this time, flowing onto my wedding dress. I felt another figure behind me, raising my head to stare at the person. It was the priest. Pity flooded his eyes as he stared at me. He shook his head slowly and walked away, letting me bawl my eyes out. I had barely cried for 30 minutes when I heard a flurry of footsteps hurrying towards me. What do you mean the bride is nowhere to be found? A female voice asked, with footsteps edging closer. I told you to keep a close eye on her, and you let her get away. I didn't think she'd leave at that moment, another voice said. A masculine one this time, causing me to raise my head. I stopped as I realized who they were. It was the Alpha Regent, Alpha Augustus, and uncle of the Crown Prince. The woman beside him was the prince's stepmother, Mrs. Antoinette. They walked closer to me, stopping short of an arm's length. Is she going to do? Lady Antoinette asked. I raised my head, shocked at her question. At this point, anything would do, the Alpha Regent said as he stared at me. What do you mean? The question had barely left my lips when Alpha Augustus grabbed me by my arms, pulling me towards the door. Good thing she is wearing a wedding dress. This would make it easier for us, Alpha Augustus said as he pulled me away. If you believe in supporting someone who's working day and night to entertain you, prove it by clicking on the subscribe button. I couldn't escape his grasp. My sadness had turned to a sudden fear of what was about to happen. The uncertainty as they pulled me into another room in the temple. It was better looking than the one my mate had left me in, while someone sat in a wheelchair at the end of the hall. What took you so long? The person asked. A rich baritone blared from the top. Lady Antoinette chuckled, nudging her head towards the Alpha Regent. We didn't mean to keep you waiting, she said as they pulled me to the altar. I felt my heart fail, an attempt to leave my ribcage. It was the heir apparent, and the next Alpha in line, Alpha Jaxon Voss, sitting in the wheelchair. His slicked back hair and honey eyes glinted in the light, a mean expression on his face to solidify the nickname everyone had given him, the Mean Voss. This isn't the dress I had asked for my bride to wear, Jaxon said without giving me as much as a glance. I'm sorry, I do not think I am your brie. My words cut short as Mrs. Antoinette stepped in. There was a mishap, and we had to make do with what we found. I stood still, shell-shocked with the events happening in a flurry. Let's get this done with. I would not want to spend another hour here, Jaxon said, clasping his gloved hands in front of him. I'm sorry. I think this is an error that needs to be resolved. It seems they have made a mistake. Have I asked you to say a word? Jaxon asked. I froze as he raised his head to stare at me. His honey eyes took me in for the first time since I stepped into the temple. Until I ask for your opinion, you still your lips, Jaxon said, returning his attention to the priest. Continue the ceremony. My tongue felt tied against my lips as I stood still. His voice was like a hammer, locking my words in place with a smash. It passed on like a wisp of wind in the summer heat, and the wedding was over. No specialty befitting someone who would become alpha. Did they do a private wedding because of the pack's view? Have I become the mate to the alpha the people hated the most? I didn't know as Lady Antoinette and Alpha Augustus dragged me away from Jackson's side, pulling me out of the temple. They stuffed me into a car, ordering the driver to drive to the castle. He didn't make a fuss, Alpha Augustus said as he stared at me. Lady Antoinette turned as well, checking my features. She does have lovely features, but it was a stitch in time. I think I want to go home now, I said, finally finding my voice as the car drove on. Lady Antoinette let out a cackle. What did you think the ceremony at the temple was for? A child's play? I shook my head, still trying to wrap around everything that had happened. I was forced against my will. You can tell it to Jaxon, Alpha Augustus said, wrinkling his nose like mentioning the name was a stain to his regency. I gulped as I understood the consequences of speaking to him. There was propaganda about Jaxon, and everyone had accepted it. Even after the accident that had crippled him. His ordinances and laws only became harsher. I kept silent throughout the journey until we arrived at the castle. Alpha Augustus grabbed my arm as he had done before, dragging me across the stretch of greenery before we reached the stairs. The castle was magnificent, an opulent edifice that gave a haunted avenue as we pushed through. Except a worker or high-working official, no one had stepped inside here and came out alive, or without a haunting story to tell. One rumor that has spread around the pack. Are you sure you left him with someone who is going to watch over him and bring him to the castle? Mrs. Antoinette said. Her voice had become a hushed whisper, like she expected someone to eavesdrop on her. I wouldn't be foolish to leave him unattended, Alpha Augustus said, before turning to me to remind himself about my presence. I was like a pawn pushed around until they stuck me in a room, shoving me inside and closing the door behind me. My voice came back to me at that moment as I fell to the ground, banging my fists against it. I don't want to marry him, I said as I crawled my way to the door. They didn't seem to hear me or think I would be back at the door as they remained in front of the door. We made him crippled, and now we can't get any closer to him, Mrs. Antoinette said, shaking like her head would fall off her shoulders. I stumbled backwards as I stared at them through the gap in the door. Alpha Augustus slammed his palm against each other. If he hadn't forced us, he wouldn't have gotten married today. Mrs. Antoinette put her hand on her figure. Her figure only flashing through the gap as she paved around. He's fulfilled his father's wish. That means he can ascend the throne at any moment, she said as she stopped pacing. How long did Voss's will state? We have 30 days to fix this, Augustus said, putting his hand under Lady Antoinette's jaw. The torture is much than I can handle. Lady Antoinette put her hand on his cheek. Let's fix this. I flinched away as Alpha Augustus' eyes peeked at my door. No one wants an unwanted alpha, he said with a smile as they walked away from the door. I sat on the ground, wrapping my arms around myself. What have I gotten myself into? I asked, crawling back to the bed where they had dropped me. Tristan's face flashed across my mind, and the pain he had inflicted flared once more as I climbed atop the bed. I cried once more, breaking into a sleep with my body folded in a fetal position. How long are you going to sleep? A male voice asked, causing me to stir awake. I jerked up, pushing myself to the end of the bed. How long have I been out? 4 hours or more, the person answered. I pushed myself to my feet, freezing in place as I realized it was Jaxon speaking to me. Jaxon sat by the window with a glass of wine in his hand. I still do not know the name of the person I've made my mate. I kept mute, recalling the incident that had happened at the wedding ceremony where I was forced against my will. You can speak now. Bridget, I answered, gathering courage to pronounce my words. Bridget Wildewood's. Too bad you had to marry a crippled prince, Jaxon said, chuckling to himself. The people of Eldoria think I am a cruel prince, don't they, Bridget? He asked, swirling the wine in his hand. Bestie, I prayed this would reach someone who cares. Don't scroll like the others. Be the one who subscribes. I gulped as I stared at him. The truth had shattered into multiple pieces from the information I had eavesdropped. It was barely a day since I was forced into marriage to the crown prince of our kingdom, and I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. Most people say you are cruel. Jaxon chuckled, sipping his wine. Are you among the most people? My answer stuck in my throat. That is what you have portrayed to the kingdom, with the orders and reforms you've sent throughout the kingdom. Jaxon wheeled his wheelchair around, turning to face me with an eerie smile in the semi-darkness. Can I do those things the rumor said? No, the answer slipped from my lips. Do you think I am a cruel prince? Jaxon asked again, dropping the glass with a clink onto the table. You haven't shown me enough, I answered, hoping the truth would set me free. Jaxon rolled his wheelchair into the light. What qualities does someone have to show that will qualify them as being cruel? I lowered my gaze to the floor. He doesn't mean to make me choose my punishment? I asked myself while my toes stabbed against the hard granite floor. They have to be uncaring, nonchalant, and possess abusive natures. Let's see what your stay here would conclude, Jaxon said, wheeling himself out of the room. I turned around to face him while staggering. Where are you going? I was thinking you would need your privacy to change out of your wedding dress, Jaxon said, staring over his shoulders. I felt the look, wrapping my hand over my body to shield myself from his gaze. I didn't bring anything. Check the wardrobe. You might see something pertaining to your size, Jaxon answered with the squealing wheel echoing as he moved away. How long would it take you to become alpha? 30 days? The squeaking wheel stopped. Is that what they told you when they asked you to marry me? I shook my head, realizing he would not know the answer if I didn't speak. No, they had found me in another of the temple's inner rooms and pulled me to where you were. Jaxon turned the chair to look at me. His face was barely visible in the dim light. Something was happening to every girl I chose to be my mate, and I knew it wasn't just because they hated me. My mate had left me at the altar, and I was crying myself into a stupor when they found me. I'm sorry. Life hasn't been fair to both of us. I am a cripple, and my people hate me for reasons I do not know. This has turned me into the person sitting in front of you, Jaxon said, pointing to himself. I let out a deep breath as it seemed to play out. He didn't even know what was happening in front of him, yet he played along with every rumor that returned to him. You will become alpha in 30 days. Yes, Jaxon answered. My father willed that I ought to have a mate if I was to ascend the throne. You couldn't do much if you weren't on the throne? I asked, pushing closer to him. You mean sitting in a wheelchair and having nothing and no one to talk to? Jaxon broke into a low chuckle. My life became a mess from the day I lost my father, and the only way for me to have a connection to him was to ascend the throne. Not until the accident happened, and I didn't care much for the throne anymore. I just wanted to get married and have a semblance of a normal life. Who's been making the rules and changing laws if it wasn't you? I asked, feeling courage seep into my body. Jaxon shrugged his shoulders as the squeaking resumed. He was moving his wheelchair back to me. It was never me. I never cared about it since the accident. And you think your accident was an accident? I asked, as he had drawn close enough to me. What are you insinuating, young woman? Are you making fun of me because I gave you free rein to speak? Jaxon asked with a rumble in his voice. I stepped back, doused in fear once more, but I willed my tongue to speak. I had overheard Lady Antoinette and Alpha Augustus speak about causing your accident. Jaxon chuckled, a bloodlust in his eyes. A day and you want to sow discord between my uncle and I. How did you think I knew you would be alpha in 30 days? My question seemed to have shut him up. That's not possible. Uncle Augustus could never do such to me. I could tell the bravado had gone in a flash with the crack in his voice. He wasn't the only one involved, and I suspect you have only 30 days to remain in this world. Jaxon broke into a laugh, using his hand to hold on to his face. 30 days? I raised an eyebrow as I stared at him. If he wasn't a cruel being, he was definitely a psychopath. 30 days are all I need, Jaxon said, looking at me with bloodshot eyes. If these words you've said are baseless propaganda, do not blame me for any action I would mete out to you. I gulped, as even this seemed more dangerous than anything I had ever done. I have no reason to lie to you. And they have no reason to warrant such betrayal, you have pointed out. Jaxon countered as he turned around, wheeling himself away. Eat, and make merry to your heart's content. To think I had fallen in love with you at first sight. Let's believe your words are true, and we get to spend an eternity together. It'd be a shame if it didn't turn out as you said. I held my hand to my chest as the door closed. His words stung in my ears compared to what I had seen in the last 24 hours. He said he had fallen in love with me, I repeated to myself as I sat on the bed. It was like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. 30 days had passed in the blink of an eye. These 30 days we had spent, each one spent on writing letters to the 13 elders. I never knew what was in their content except for Jaxon. He had even taken his time to visit them privately. Those 30 days, I never wished they came to an end. I had realized Jaxon wasn't as they had portrayed in the outside world, raising taxes and putting unfair rules, but the next hours would spill the truth as I wheeled Jaxon into the meeting room. 16 chairs graced a long table, handcrafted to look untouchable. They had taken out the Alpha's chair in the middle to accommodate Jaxon's chair. Alpha Augustus stepped into the room, dropping into a seat. A nudge of his head as a greeting while I stared on. Servants and housekeepers poured in, serving food on the table. Yet not even one elder had arrived. "Why aren't the elders here?" I asked after we had been at the table far more than the designated time. "It seems the elders don't want to see you become the Alpha of Eldoria," Alpha Augustus said, clapping his hands like someone who had just finished watching an opera. I had stopped my question, shocked by the suddenness of Alpha Augustus. This wasn't what I had expected when they said they would take care of him on this day. Jaxon said nothing, holding his jaw with his arm. "I had heard of your little escapades, visiting the 13 elders to lobby them to your side," Alpha Augustus continued. "Must have been a wee bit of hope for yourself to get what you want." Jaxon shook for a moment but composed himself, letting out a deep breath. "What did you think would happen after 30 days? I would relinquish the authority I have over Eldoria?" Alpha Augustus asked, his claws stretched out of his hand with an ominous gaze. "Do you hear that? That's the sound of my heart breaking every time you scroll past without subscribing." I stood behind Jaxon, holding his wheelchair still. They had come to finish the very thing they had started. "Your people hate you, Jaxon," Alpha Augustus said as he stood from his seat. "An elaborate plan I had made all my life." Jaxon raised his head to stare at his uncle. "Why didn't you kill me? It should have ended your struggles in a moment." Alpha Augustus, "You think I didn't try? The accident. Who did you think caused it?" Jaxon adjusted his weight to stare at his uncle. "Yet you spent days at my hospital side as I recovered. What were your reasons? To make sure I crossed to the other side?" Alpha Augustus shrugged his shoulders. "But you didn't die, and I thought. I was Alpha Regent. No one would care much about an Alpha who could not lead them in battle, and not one they hated." Jaxon didn't seem disturbed about the man in front of us. "You've been the one spreading those false rumors about me?" "What do you think, my little cousin?" Augustus asked, smiling with his fangs pouring out of his mouth. "Antoinette had her way with words. She only married your father thinking he would give her the leadership role, and she would marry me, passing it to me, but Voss was a fool, and he made you his heir." Jaxon nodded, almost like he had accepted his fate. "I never knew my stepmother would hate me this much. Antoinette never loved Voss. I was the one for her. But some things had to be done," Alpha Augustus replied with a smirk of victory. "You have me now. What are you going to do?" Jaxon asked with a smile. He put a hand on my hand, a sign of accepting what I had told him as the truth. "With no one here, I can kill you with the perfect alibi standing behind you," Alpha Augustus said, staring at me with a smirk. "Everyone is going to believe me when I say she killed you, because she saw you as an easy target to take over Eldoria." I could feel Jaxon's hand tighten against my hand. My heart skipped at the elaborate plan Alpha Augustus had made, even twitching it to put me in it. My thoughts disappeared in an instant as Jaxon's grip released and a laugh escaped his throat. What are you laughing about? The concept of death doesn't scare you anymore. Alpha Augustus asked, slipping closer to us. Jaxon raised his head to stare at his uncle. To think I had trusted you, but I've always had that gnawing feeling someone wanted me dead. Never thought it would be you, uncle. Now that you know, nephew, there is nothing you can do about it, Alpha Augustus answered. Jaxon let out another round of laughter as he pressed his hands against his wheelchair. Any last words? Alpha Augustus asked with his hand raised in the air. Those are enough words to be said. An elderly voice sounded behind what seemed like a curtain. An elderly man stepped out with 12 elderly men behind him, and what looked like Lady Antoinette as well. They had her cuffed and her mouth barred. I hadn't realized it as my mouth was agape. Jaxon had stood from his wheelchair, standing like someone who was unable to work. What is this? Alpha Augustus asked, realizing the trap that had sprung around him. I stood gazing at Jaxon, unable to comprehend what had happened. This is what happens when you plan to overthrow your alpha, another elder answered. A growl emanated from Jaxon's throat as he lunged at Alpha Augustus, pinning him to the ground. It had happened in the blink of an eye. A knife clicked from the table, glinting as Jaxon held it up in the air. You can't do it, can you? Alpha Augustus asked with a maniacal laugh. Jaxon said nothing, with a heaving chest and his shaking hands. He still could not comprehend his uncle would do such a thing to him. My hand crossed my mouth as I stared at what was happening. You are just like him, overridden by emotions, even when I stabbed him. He could not do a thing but stare at me, Alpha Augustus said, pulling out a knife from nowhere. Jaxon, I screamed, reaching out for him. Jaxon growled, pinning Alpha Augustus' hand to the ground and stabbing the knife into his chest in a flash. I watched it happen, turning around as blood splashed around the room while Lady Antoinette squirmed to get out of her bonds. Jaxon stood with a knife stuck in his uncle's chest and blood over his hand. He turned to me, showing me his blood-stained hands. Is this enough to consider me a mean person? I shook my head, running into his arms while staring at Alpha Augustus, who stared back with blank eyes. Believe me when I tell you to. Jaxon chuckled, wrapping his hands around me. You can lie to me as much as you want, and I will believe every single word you say. I chuckled, turning my eyes away from the dead man. You do not have to rule Eldoria if you don't want to, I said as I held him still, and you could have told me you could walk. It would have spoiled the element of surprise if I had told you, Jaxon said as he pulled me away, turning to face the elders. What are we going to do with her, Alpha? An elder asked as they pushed Antoinette in front of them. Jaxon took one look at her. My first order as Alpha is to overturn every rule she had imposed on my people. The second one. He stopped with an intense gaze. Throw her into the harshest dungeon you can make. It seems you have something else you want, Alpha? Another elder asked as the guards dragged a thrashing Lady Antoinette out of the room. Jaxon turned to me, shaking his head. No, I have everything I want with me here, he said as he placed a kiss on my lips. I welcomed him, kissing him back. Maybe there is something like a bloody fairy tale ending. Besties, hope this story made your day as much as your subscription would brighten mine. Here's hoping you'd also tune in to my next story. Lots of love.